indeed they're worthwhile going to listen to and to see, because I'll tell you, they are pretty vital on stage, and you can tell that they love the music. They just love their music, and a lot of it is written by John, and Claire's gorgeous voice brings that into perspective for most of us. Anyway, Dandelion Charm. Now, we've got an election on May the 2nd, and I would urge you to go and cast your vote, and cast it in a sensible way. Listen to the arguments, ask, debate with yourself. Let's stop party politics, and let's say, locally, what is it that a group of politicians could do if they all got together and they worked? I don't care. I don't care which party they are, can they do the job? And many years ago, I lived in Vancouver, and Vancouver was, in those days, governed by a very small council. I think it was about 15 people, perhaps even less than that. And they even had a communist there, a guy called Harry Rankin. I can remember he was a great character. The only thing is, of course, is they wouldn't let him into the United States. He could go down to the border. He got there, and they all knew who he was. They said, "Sorry, Harry, back to Vancouver, boy, back to Vancouver." But he was a lawyer, and he wasn't a stupid man by any means. And they also had somebody from, in those days, was known as Social Credit, which to all intents and purposes was a pretty medium-right Conservative Party. And that city was governed in a very, very efficient way. And so a combination of people, does party politics have a place in local government? I think that's one of the things that we should start to ask. And I'm not saying go and vote because somebody, I can remember taking my daughter first time to a racetrack when she was quite young. She was about 10, I guess. And of course, she bet on the colour of the horse's eyes. So we all chuckled. And race 7, we placed some bets for her in Vancouver. It was only on the tote. There wasn't any off-track betting. But we placed little bets for her, and she'd lost about $7 or $8 until the last race, when she once again looked at the horse's eyes and won 50 quid. Well, $50. So who can argue about that? But the point of that story is, sometimes we vote for people because they're nice, or we know them. Well, nice people sometimes aren't effective in a job. So even though you may think that somebody is a very nice guy, and that you will vote for him because, well, we want to do something for him, don't we? Don't do it. Look at what the issues are, and look at what a candidate says that they're going to do, so that we can actually hold them to account once they're in. Because actually, I can't see that this council, the elected officials, have been held much to account. The executive most certainly haven't. And dear old Boris Johnson. You know, Boris is a bit of my hero, simply because we call ourselves Mirador Television and Rouser Radio. We call ourselves Marmite stations. You either, like Marmite, love us or hate us, but you never forget us. And Boris is a bit like that, isn't he? Sometimes you love him. You know, when there was a bit of video with a cheetah or a leopard or something licking his ear, and he let the cheetah. I mean, there is a man who shows his human face, and then he can go and do some stupid things, and everybody says, Boris. But anyway, he made a speech 3 or 4 weeks ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago now, I guess. And of course his main reason was targeting Theresa May. But basically what he said was, we've got to actually change the way that we're governed. Governance isn't working in this country. And I must say that I have to agree with him. It's not. If we are reflected the way that we're governed by what's happening in the House of Commons at the moment, which I think is disgraceful, what we've got is a bunch of people who are self-serving. They're not in any way worried about us, the electorate. Oh, they say from time to time, I am going to do what the electorate says and what I swore that we would do, and so on and so forth. But, you know, they've got a manifesto, and let's break it. Yeah. oh, the public don't like us spending money on a lot of the expenses that we find we can. Okay, we'll somebody has entered some rules that we shouldn't do that. We'll just break them. Oh dear. Anyway, that's central government, and we need to be cognizant of what's going on in Westminster because it affects us locally. Our slogan is local but not parochial. But locally, we've got an executive which seems to be broken. In Lewis, and that of course covers Eastbourne, Lewis and Eastbourne now, and what a disaster that merger has turned out to be. But also, right across the southeast, when I talk to people, they have the same feelings about their own district councils and their own, in some instances, town councils. But for all of us, we got one common, and that is the East Sussex County Council. And there is a large measure of dissatisfaction, a large measure which is common to us all. Now, we have the power to do something about that because we have the vote. That's one of the great privileges which we have. We have the vote. I did a historical piece on Lewis called The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town. It actually got a slow start, but it went around the country. And I stand outside the castle in Lewis and say that I think that the government stinks. That the past government stunk, and that probably the next government will stink. The point that I'm making is that I don't really mean that, but I can say it, and I don't get my head cut off. And 200 or 300 years ago, that's exactly what would happen to you if you stood against the establishment. And, in fact, the man that we revere so much, Tom Paine, with his rights of man and his stance, which was really against the power of the monarchy and the power of the establishment, is he was charged with, it wasn't quite treason. I can't remember exactly what the charge was, but it was akin to treason. And if found guilty, he would have been hung, drawn, and quartered. And that was only in the 1700s, not very long ago in the scheme of things. But if he had, and indeed what he did was, he uttered a few thoughts and words that were anti-establishment, and they nabbed him. Well, in the main, that doesn't happen today. We are able to voice our opinions without fear or favour. Well, we are sort of, although once the trolls get going, of course, that's a problem with the voice of internet, but nonetheless, that's a chance we have to take. It doesn't stop us voicing our opinions. And those opinions can be translated into let's have action when we go to the polls. So do think very carefully about it. I know that sounds like a lecture. It is a lecture. I don't mean it to be a lecture. All I'm asking you to do is to think and use your vote sensibly and use your vote, because that's the most precious thing we've got. You know, we tend to take it for granted that this form of democracy will remain. But we're as vulnerable as any society to a change that may take that away from us. And so we have to be careful. Don't take anything for granted. Let's make sure that we use the privilege that we have now sensibly. Oh boy, am I lecturing this morning. Never mind. I think that there are issues that we need to think about and take to our hearts. Oh dear, I better take something else to heart. Here's something called Church from Benjamin Banger. As I recall, it's difficult to say why this piece has anything to do with church, but I think it's not a bad little number. Let's take a listen. Well, amen to that. That'll wake you if nothing else. And I think I must take my earpiece and stick it into my ear so that when it comes to sermon time in the church, is what I can do is I can listen to that and be sitting there chuckling while some of the sermons that I hear are pretty damn awful. Some quite good, but most of them is. I think that the priests feel that they've got to deliver, and instead of letting go and giving us a little bit of sound advice, not all, but many. Anyway, let's not get on to the church this morning. Somebody in one of the groups, and this is Keith Hayes, broadcasting from Lewes in East Sussex, and covering the tiny towns from Battle to Brighton, all the towns in between, and those going north to Gatwick and to Tunbridge Wells. And we are just having a look at what's gone wrong with our society. And I was saying just before we went to Benjamin Banger and that little bit called church, use your vote sensibly. But somebody in one of the groups, and there is a new phenomenon starting. These little groups on Facebook are quite interesting because they're reflective of what's going on in the small communities. I mean, there are a couple of Lewis Present, for instance, but there are a couple of these groups, these Facebook groups, for almost every town across the southeast. And people disagree with one another over things, so that it becomes a debating chamber in itself. And the nice thing is that because it is an open forum, we're not talking about anything fake here. In fact, it's very easy to see that local people spot the fakes straight away, and that's very encouraging. But they do come up with little gems about what's happening as far as the local councils are concerned. And we're then able to start to look at them. And indeed, there is one which is not a group for a particular town, I don't think. It's called Lewis I, but it does keep an eye on all the towns around the district. And Lewis I think, is operated by either an ex or a present investigative journalist who wants to remain anonymous because they do one heck of a job. They are very good. I'm full of admiration for them. But anyway, all these little groups start to debate issues at a very, 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 very local level, and then they throw them up to the next level, which perhaps is us, where we can air them, and then they are sometimes taken up by the so-called local media, which isn't that local anymore. And but they do take cognizance of the very important things that happen. So there is a new form of journalism starting, and I hope that what we'll do is we'll be able to take the place of those people, those institutions like the newspapers and radio and so on. They have really local radio in other parts of the world. We only get it at Bonfire, unfortunately. But hopefully we can take that place, and we can ask people to look very carefully at these issues. And if I know about them, I can voice them. And then people like the investigative journalists at Lewis I can take them up. That's all that I've got time for this morning. So let me say to you, toodle pip, and I'll see you tomorrow.